So here we'll start with a exercise I learned as a teenager. Lots of various martial arts classes from Taekwondo to karate, kung fu, all of that. They show this stretch over and over again, and it's a good one for good reasons. It's a good one. Hamstrings, hip adductors, hip external rotators, hip internal rotators. Everything gets hit really well with this stretch. You notice I have a variation with my toes pulled back and also with my toes pointed forward. Play with rotations, rolling your heel in and out with this one. I like to go back and forth with that and your classic tall lunge stretch. Again, this is an old favorite for a very good reason. Everybody really needs to get those hip flexors moving. Keeping your knee on the ground like this is a lot more accessible to people than being up on the ball of the foot. Again, you can play with rotations, hips going forward, also going side to side. As you get better at it, you want to play with moving in and out of the stretch and going both ways. Sitting back down on my heel, if you're able to do this with your knee, it's a great way to work on hip flexibility on both sides while stretching out your hamstrings. And again, working from side to side and playing with moving while in the stretch. Putting your hands on your knees, getting bent forward a little bit can tend to help some people that have trouble moving in and out of the posture. You can also play with having a overhead support or a chair in front of you. Remember, the starting position for any stretch isn't necessarily what I show in any video, but just the starting position of what you can do. Here we have had a lot of questions from people about not being able to put their knee on the ground in a lot of different poses where they're trying to stretch the hip openers. So here I show a variation where you put your foot in front of you, your knee is up, and you just rock back and forth. If you can put the knee on the ground, that's great. But if you can't, just let it float on up. Play with where you put your foot in or out on their side, and also where your hips are, your butt is up in the air. So this is a nice way to access that hip external rotation where your knee is rolling outwards in a different way. The hurdler stretch, I hear a lot of complaints from people and some students where they feel like they can't let that knee drop all the way down. Well, you don't need to. Work on what you can. If the knee is up in the air, lean forward. If your knee can go flat, lean forward that way. There's actually another interesting variation to do is to pull that knee all the way up, go on the inside of your knee with your elbow, and go on the outside of your foot with your hand. So you have that forward bend plus a rotation at the hip and a little bit at the spine. I like this one. Don't be afraid to hold for time on this. Generally, I like to move back and forth about 10 times and then hold 20, 30 seconds, even up to a minute. 3 minutes at max. So here I'll show how to do a tall kneeling lunge with some hip internal rotation angles. So if you roll your foot outwards, that's the same as turning your hip medial rotation inward. You do that and you're going to place a little bit of a different stretch on the hip flexors and also on the external rotators of the hip. So you see I'm sitting back, getting my hips back as far as I can. Be careful if you have knee problems, medial knee problems, but most people that don't have issues with that can do this very effectively. Here's another angle. You see how I can sit back here. If I were to lean forward with my foot in front, that would be a hip flexor stretch. Sitting back is more of a hip rotator stretch. And again, play with the position of your foot, to either help your knee or to increase the stretch of the hip. Here's another variant. Now I'm taking this as more of that hip flexor stretch I talked about, leaning forward and rolling that hip to the outside of my foot. Notice I'm moving my whole body. I'll change the angle here so you see a little bit better. Get my elbow out of the way. Right here. You can open up a nice stretch from your armpit all the way through into your knee.